Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for a press conference with our NDP finance critic, Daniel Blaikie, and our NDP critic for seniors, Rachel Blaney. They're both joined this morning by the National Director for Campaign 2000, Leila Sarangi, and Miss Janet McLeod. We'll have a period for questions at the end. Bonjour, merci de nous rejoindre ce matin pour une conférence de presse avec le porte-parole du NPD en matière de finances, Daniel Blaikie, et la porte-parole du NPD pour les années, Rachel Blaney. Nous sommes aussi, on a aussi avec nous ce matin la directrice nationale du Campaign 2000, Leila Sarangi, et Madame Janet McLeod. On va prendre des questions à la fin. Alors, je passe la parole à Daniel.
Thank you very much for that, Alana. And we're here this morning because we don't believe that Canadian seniors should have to die in the cold while the government figures out a solution to its own mistake, which was to count the pandemic benefits in the eligibility calculation for income-tested benefits like the Guaranteed Income Supplement. And while we were glad to see the government finally acknowledge this problem in their fall economic update, we were very disappointed to see in the budget tables that accompanied that they don't intend to flow the money that would correct this mistake to the affected seniors until May of this year. We know that that's simply too late for many people who have already been evicted and are struggling with this terrible Canadian winter on the street or living in their car. We've heard a variety of different stories. And so we're joined here today by Campaign 2000, who's done excellent advocacy on behalf of people struggling throughout the pandemic, who were already on the financial margins heading into the pandemic. And we're calling for a one-time emergency payment of $2,500 to affected seniors and up to $100 million in housing relief cash to help ensure that those who have not already been evicted can stay in their homes, and to start rehousing people that have been evicted as soon as possible on an urgent basis to get them out of the cold and into a home while they wait for the government to straighten itself out and come to an acceptable solution to correct this serious problem that the government has known about since last May. There's been reporting in the media about, government receiving documents in May saying that this would affect seniors' GIS eligibility. They didn't act. We started hearing about the problem in July when the GIS reassessments occurred and people found out that their GIS benefit would either be eliminated or drastically reduced. We raised it before the election, during the election, and after the election. It wasn't until December in the fall economic statement that the government properly recognized there was a problem and announced some intention to really fix it. But the fact is that the words in the fall economic statement don't pay rent. And so seniors have continued to be evicted despite that announcement. And that's why we need something far more concrete and financially tangible for these seniors in order to ensure that they're protected from the worst, which in this case is pretty serious when we look at the kind of winter that we're having here in Canada. Alors, nous sommes ici aujourd'hui parce que nous pensons que les aînés canadiens ne devront pas se mourir à cause d'une erreur gouvernementale qui a été faite quand le gouvernement a décidé d'inclure les prestations de pandémie dans les calculations pour avoir accès au supplément de revenus garantis. Nous savons que le gouvernement savait depuis mai de 2021 qu'il y avait un problème. Ils ont décidé de rien faire. Nous avons soulevé cet enjeu en août avant l'élection. On l'a soulevé pendant l'élection et après l'élection. Et c'était pas encore, c'était pas jusqu'à décembre que le gouvernement a vraiment annoncé une vraie intention avec des chiffres pour corriger le problème, mais il reste un grand problème et c'est que l'argent ne vient pas jusqu'à mai 2022. Et pour des aînés qui ont déjà perdu leur logement et pour les aînés qui fait face en ce moment, aujourd'hui, à perdre leur logement, mais est tout simplement trop tard. Puis il va y avoir des conséquences sévères si ces aînés ne reçoivent pas un paiement d'urgence. Alors, c'est pourquoi nous sommes ici aujourd'hui avec Campaign 2000 pour faire appel pour un paiement d'urgence de 2500 $ pour chaque aîné affecté et un fonds de jusqu'à 100 millions de dollars pour utiliser pour s'assurer que les aînés qui n'ont pas encore perdu leur logement ne le perdent pas avant mai 2022 et pour ceux qui ont déjà perdu leur logement, qu'on peut leur trouver un logement sur un base urgent. So thank you very much again for joining us this morning as we talk about this important issue. And I'd like to turn it now to my colleague, Rachel Blaney. Rachel?
Well, thank you so much, Daniel. And, I have to say that I'm really devastated that we're here today. In December, we were in the House of Commons telling the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister how serious this issue was, how many seniors across this country, vulnerable seniors, were losing their homes, were not able to afford their medication, which meant that they were in and out of hospitals because they couldn't afford their basic medication because of this terrible fault of denying people, the most vulnerable seniors, their guaranteed income supplement. And when the announcement was made with the financial update, seniors across this country were relieved that maybe finally they would be able to move back into a home, that they would finally be able to just look after themselves in the most fundamental ways to maintain their basic dignity. And seeing this result, that they're being asked to wait several more months, has done things to seniors across this country that I don't think the government is accepting or recognizing in a meaningful way. I think of in my riding, for example, 4 seniors went together to 2 different banks. They brought the financial economic update to show that they could get a line of credit because the money was coming, and they were denied. And I want to be clear so that everybody in this country understands. These are seniors that were just hoping to stay in their home. They just wanted enough money to pay the rent. And they were denied because they didn't know when that money was coming. So we are now having seniors going to predatory lending companies where the interest rates are so high that they're just accumulating more debt, not because they are asking for too much, but because they are trying to stay in their home or trying to afford medication for their loved one so that they're not in and out of the hospital, so that they're not worried that they're going to die. And I think that we cannot underestimate the urgency of this, because we do have seniors across this country that are dying, that are looking at suicide as a way to deal with this issue. And that has to be acknowledged. The other thing that is so important about this, and I really want to say thank you to Campaign 2000 for their hard work on this, for amplifying the voice of seniors across this country. Because what is also happening is a lot of seniors who were getting the guaranteed income supplement, when they lost it, lost other provincial funding that helped them pay for things like their housing and for other necessities. I think if in British Columbia, we've talked to a lot of seniors who have lost the SAFER program, which helped pay part of their rent. So now, not only have they lost their guaranteed income supplement, they've lost the other resources to help them make it through the day. And so this is urgent. We are asking for an emergency payment, because this is not just an emergency, it is beyond an emergency. It was an emergency in the fall of last year. So we now have seniors that are living in their vehicles. We have families who, and we're hearing this recently, 60% of families not feeling like they have enough money to feed their family, are trying to take in their elderly parents and loved ones, trying to make things work, but they don't have enough either. So the crisis point is just expanding and growing. And so we're here today to urgently call for this, because we are past an emergency. We need the federal government to stand up and do the right thing. And we need them to stop making empty promises that just leads more seniors to despair. So I'm going to hand it over to the amazing hands of Leila right now to talk about this, but I really hope that Canada hears and they push all of their political officials to make sure that this is a top priority, because this is about dignity for the people who built this country, for the people who worked hard, for the moms who stayed at home and raised their families and looked after their children, for people who worked low-income jobs that we need every single day. These are working seniors that did nothing wrong, and they are being punished by this government. It's in your hands, Leila. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel and Daniel. Thank you both for inviting me to speak today. As has been said, I'm Leila Sarangi, the National Director of Campaign 2000, which is a diverse, nonpartisan, pan-Canadian coalition of over 120 organizations working to end child and family poverty. And together we represent every province and territory in this country. When the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit rolled out in March 2020, it rolled out very quickly. It was a relatively low barrier application process, and the money flowed to people in need, and that was a good thing. Very early on, however, we identified that there would be fallouts from this quick design and implementation, and we've been raising these concerns with government and all parties since the summer of 2020. So it's extremely regrettable and devastating that we are finding ourselves here today in this crisis. By the time last month's fiscal update promised to repay GIS amounts lost to seniors, many had already lost their housing, their small businesses, and were having to go without food and medication because they had no income. As has been mentioned, one person in the Northwest Territories had reached out to me to say that by November of last year, they were living in their car. Seniors are aware of this promised repayment, but they did not know this repayment was set to come until May 2022. May 2022 is simply too far away. In the weeks since the fiscal update, we've been hearing from our partners, including community service organizations and legal clinics, about seniors who are in rent arrears coming to them for housing help in a time when shelters are overrun by Omicron and we're experiencing extreme winter weather conditions. Just last week, one of our Ontario legal clinic partners was in an online landlord-tenant board hearing where a 76-year-old senior was evicted because of rent arrears. And just yesterday, I heard from a senior in Calgary, Alberta, who lost her GIS, as did many of her neighbors in her apartment building. Some are in rent arrears, some have already been evicted, and one of her neighbors committed suicide because of the stress and pain that this is causing. This is quite literally an issue of life and death. It's a life and death situation here. To provide a bit more context, seniors who receive the GIS are low-waged workers. In order to qualify, a single senior must be earning less than $19,248. They are the poorest of all seniors, the ones who have to work past the age of 65 just to make ends meet. They serve coffee and greet customers and provide advice to us in hardware and gardening stores. They do not have a savings to fall back on to carry them over the next several months. And amidst reports of rising inflation, the cost of living is going up, and the situation is going to get more and more dire. There is so much that is egregious and unfair about this situation. For instance, the $5,000 threshold for earned income, meaning that seniors can keep the first $5,000 that they make before the GIS reductions kick in, did not apply to the CERB. And that meant the clawback started right on the first dollar of CERB. In addition, those who live in rent geared to income housing had their rents increased by 30% of the pandemic benefit. And on the flip side, just 2 weeks ago, a new report showed that CEOs of major companies made millions of dollars in bonuses while their companies received the federal wage subsidy with no clawbacks or taxbacks. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has reported that the typical loss to the nearly 90,000 seniors affected would average $5,000 each. Yesterday, we wrote a letter an open letter to the Minister of Seniors, which we also shared with the Minister of Finance, and we laid out 2 immediate actions. And as you've heard, those 2 immediate actions are to immediately provide an interim down payment of $2,500 to all GIS clawback victims who had losses of at least that amount, and to immediately implement a $100 million housing fund for pandemic clawback victims using a very low barrier distribution method to help keep them housed. I'll just end by saying that the Serve Amnesty movement is extremely concerned about this situation and that seniors are not the only ones affected. Pandemic benefits have triggered clawbacks with a range of other benefits provided to low and moderate income families, including social and disability assistance, child benefits, workers' benefits, and the GST credit. And we know that those who are living in poverty are more likely to be Indigenous, racialized, migrants, children and adults with disabilities, women, and lone mother-led families, among other marginalized groups. This is deeply connected to the broader issue of equity in our society. And the bottom line is that vulnerable people should not be left worse off for having accessed pandemic benefits in a time of crisis. Thank you for your time, and I will now turn it over to the incredible Janet to share her story.
Well, thank you, Leila, and thanks to everyone else who's listening. I am one of those seniors who have had a small business for a number of years and was quite sure in March of 2020 that that was going to be the end of it. With everything shutting down, I was quite pleased to qualify for CERB. Of course, none of us have known that we'd still be locked down in so many respects with COVID well now into 2022. Maybe it would be a few months, we hoped, but no such luck. So I applied for and received CERB, not having any idea what was going to happen to my rent. They were threatening to raise that. I was in the rent geared to income. They didn't, but knowing that, you know, was it going to be too good to be true? I feared that, and it seems to have turned out in that respect somewhat. My business, I was able to convert to online. I help students get into university. I don't drive a taxi. That can't be done virtually. I don't do people's hair, clearly. That can't be done virtually, but mine, over the few months that I was receiving CERB, gave myself a better online profile, as well as a better computer system so that I could be, when my students were more comfortable doing things online and their parents not meeting me in person. Many recruitment and college fairs, all of them are still canceled now 2 years later. All of those methods to get business have fallen away. But I was very happy that towards the end of 2020 and into 2021, I did start seeing students again and didn't need COVID. But of course, didn't need CERB. Of course, what I didn't realize was that when July came, that my GIS would be taken away totally. And in the meantime, with COVID continuing, I've noticed a kind of depression in everybody. My business is helping people plan for the future. And I can see in the faces of young people that they're really depressed. Planning for an exciting future is so uncertain for them. So my business is again wavering, and to lose my GIS, well, payments are due for credit card and rent, and I'm running out of money. And now to find out I'm going to have to wait till May is very much a struggle, even though I admit that compared to certain other seniors, I'm not in as dire straits as many of them. However, I've had a lot of medical expenses now in my 80th year, and I wasn't planning for those, and a lot of them are not covered by OHIP. So that things have been very, very difficult, and to get anything at this point would be very, very welcome. and enable me to continue white knuckling it through COVID, though happily I haven't had COVID. So anyway, thank you for listening to us who have lost our GIS and really need it as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Mary, for Janet, for sharing your story. We'll now turn it over to a question period. I would ask you to use the raise hand function if you have a question. We'll have one question and one follow-up. On va prendre des questions maintenant. Je vous demande d'utiliser la fonction lever la main, une question et une question suivie. The first question is from Marie Wolf with the Canadian Press. Go ahead, Marie. Are you maybe on mute, Marie?
Yeah. No, sorry, I've just unmuted there. Sorry about that. I wanted to ask you, Rachel, you referred to alarming stories of seniors committing suicide, living in their cars. And I'd be interested to know what the provenance of that is. Leila referred to somebody whose neighbor committed suicide. Are these, what is that based on? Could you just say a little more about that, please?
Well, thank you for that question. And that information is based on people reporting to us or calling. As the seniors critic for the NDP, you know, we have heard from people across the country, heartbreaking stories of people not being able to afford basic food. You know, loved ones reaching out to our office saying, my mom's talking about suicide. You know, one younger woman called because her grandmother was talking to me. I was talking to her about that. You know, this is happening, and we've been very clear with the minister. You know, I don't want to share people's, I don't have authority to share people's names and tell you exactly where they live, because these are their private lives. These are very raw moments of honesty. But we have connected people with the minister's office, you know, left notes for the ministers to hear from these people. You know, and a lot of people are sending us messages that they sent to the prime minister, to the finance minister, saying we told them, but they didn't respond to us. You know, I think of just yesterday, one of my team was talking to someone who said, I had to sell most of my stuff. Like, I'm living in an empty house with just a few things left. I had to sell things just to pay the rent, just to feed myself. We've talked, and I think Leila talked about this as well, to multiple seniors that are living in their vehicles, trying to make ends meet, because they were evicted from their homes. You know, a lot of seniors are losing between $500 to $1,000 a month. This is not a little piece of money. This is a big chunk of money. And I'm going to go back to that other part, that in some provinces or territory, they're losing access to other services. Their GIS opens the door. So, for example, in British Columbia, we have a senior that we've been working with who lost the SAFER program. It paid for part of his rent. He lost not only his GIS, but then he lost the SAFER program as well. And so, you know, my frustration with this is these are working seniors. These are seniors like Janet that had jobs to subsidize the small amount of money they were making. And I think what Leila said is really important. People who are receiving GIS, if they are single, they are just making over $19,000. If they're in a couple, they are just making over $24,000. They are making that work for a whole year in this country. So whatever we may think, they are already living way below the poverty line in this country. And if they have the ability to go out and work, they are out there doing that to subsidize, to pay for key things like medication or rent. You know, rent is going up. And so we are dealing with the fact that the amount that you have to pay for everything is going up substantively. So at the same time this is happening, they've lost a big chunk of their income. So we're hearing from Canadians, from seniors across this country, that are living in dire, dire situations. And we have indicated that very clearly, not only, our party, but of course, folks like Campaign 2000 and a lot of serving agencies that serve seniors have been telling the ministers over and over again, this is what's happening. We need to correct it.
And if I could just add to that, I mean, I think the other thing that is a cause of serious frustration is that this is doable. The government already has the list of people who are being affected. They know who were denied their GIS based on pandemic benefits. We know that they can roll financial assistance out quickly because we've seen it during the pandemic. We know that this is something that the government can afford because they refuse to ask for any repayment from large corporations that took the wage subsidy while paying bonuses to their CEOs and dividends to their shareholders. We've seen some companies take tens of millions of dollars in wage subsidy and then increase their regular dividend payments to shareholders. Never mind, the very real possibility of an excess profit tax during the pandemic that the NDP has called for. We know that some companies that didn't take the wage subsidy did very well, far better than they did in pre-pandemic years, and we think it's reasonable that they would pay a surcharge on those extra profits in order to be able to help fund solutions to problems that the pandemic has created. And this is certainly something that requires a swift financial response. So we know that the government can act that quickly. They have the information they need to act, and there are sources of revenue for the government if they want to do right by these Canadian seniors that are facing such a difficult situation. And that adds to the frustration here. We're not asking for something impossible. We're not asking for the moon. We're asking for a very real and doable solution to a problem that is already taking lives.
Do you have a follow-up, Marie?
Yes, can you hear me all right? Rachel, you mentioned that you spoke to the minister's office about these particular seniors in dire straits, including people who were threatening to commit suicide or considering it. Could you tell me what the minister's response to that was?
So, sorry, I think my internet kicked out for a second. The minister's response, we have not heard a response from the minister at this point. And I also want to be really clear. The majority of the messaging going to the minister's office are from people themselves, people who have sent the messages to the minister's office, and because they have not received a response, forwarded it on to our office. And so we are taking those in, we are listening to their stories, and that is why we are here amplifying their voices. People are working really hard on this because they see the absolute lack of fairness, because they are vulnerable people who have worked hard their whole lives. And I keep coming back to this, but these were working seniors. These were seniors that, like every other Canadian, saw their jobs disappear because of the pandemic. They applied for the only program that was out there to help them get through a very difficult time when their income went down substantively. That is what happened. And so I'm calling on the minister, and I've done it many times in the House. Talked about, one gentleman who was going to be evicted in December, who had just been diagnosed with cancer. And because of this cutback, was not able to afford his rent or the medication for his cancer treatment. This is not a joke. These are people who are losing their lives. And I did talk directly to the finance minister. And I said to her, if you follow through and you get this money out the door right away, you will literally save lives in this country. That was her choice not to.
Our next question comes from Peter Zimanovic of the CBC. Go ahead, Peter.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello? Hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great. Wonderful. I couldn't hear you. So I know my name's Tricky, it's Zimanovic, but I just wanted to ask to follow up on the question of you mentioning people who are living in their cars or who have killed themselves. I realize that you haven't brought any of them with you today, but do you have any statistics around this aside from anecdotal evidence? Do you have any numbers that we can put on this so we can get a sense of how widespread this desperation is?
If I may, there are two sources of information on how many people may be affected by this. The Parliamentary Budget Officer released a report on this issue in the fall and estimated that there was approximately 88,000 Canadian seniors across the country who were affected by this. And then in the fall economic statement, the government itself published some numbers. Their estimate, or the people that they're targeting with their one-time payment solution, is in the order of about 200,000 people. So, clearly there's a different methodology being used in estimating how many people are affected, but it's somewhere between 88,000 and 200,000 seniors that are affected across the country.
So that's sort of, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Not quite the question I was asking. I understand the number because I put that into my last story I wrote on the subject, the broad number. But what I was curious about is the number of people that you're saying, because it sounds quite disturbing, the picture you're painting of people committing suicide, living in their car, being thrown out on the street. I'm wondering how many do you know? Have you done any are you able to quantify the people that have, not just that are impacted, I have that sense, but the ones that are impacted to the degree to which you're suggesting today? I don't doubt it. I just wanted to get a sense of how widespread that far end desperation is, not the number of people impacted. I don't know if you had done any, or you are going to do any a survey to look at that or not, or I'm just, if you have any more meat on that, I would be grateful.
I mean, certainly, I think this is something that government should be concerned to know, but I would certainly rather that they spend their time figuring out how to get the money into the hands of all of the people who are affected than figuring out how to do that kind of granular data collection. But I might turn this one to Leila, just because she is on the front line and working with folks that are affected, to see what kind of efforts there may have been to quantify those who are in the most desperate need.
So we haven't done the quantification either, but we have been hearing stories, as both your offices have, from across the country, same kinds of stories about reaching out to ministers and finance committee and hearing nothing and coming back to us. What I do want to say is just to reiterate that these are very, very low income seniors. Anyone who's trying to make ends meet on less than $20,000 a year is struggling. There is always this stress and lower health outcomes associated with poverty. So if I was to make an educated guess, I would say that most of those people who have seen their GIS cut back are experiencing some kind of associated increase in anxiety and mental health. Poverty is a vicious cycle. It is intergenerational. And I think one thing that the pandemic has showed us that we just cannot turn away from is that deep connection between health, social, and economic outcomes. When we don't have the money to be able to put food on the table, pay for our medications, this increases stress, and anxiety and mental health issues, and it impacts the whole family. As Rachel was talking about, now that adult children are trying to get their kids' needs met, their own needs met, juggling with work, and then also now trying to care for parents who have had this money just taken away out from under the rug without any prior notice. As Janet talked about, this was a surprise. There was no time to put any kind of support in place, and we are still in the midst of the worst wave that we've seen. For us who work in the social services, it means our services are still very, very inaccessible. So, I think my educated guess to try to directly answer your question, Peter, would be that most, if not all, of these seniors have experienced some increase, and probably significant increase, in their mental health situation. And Janet, I'm not sure if you want to add to that.
I, of course, don't know all the people in the building I used to live in Toronto, subsidized housing, who may have been getting CERB and then lost their GIS, because I wouldn't ask a fellow neighbor what their income was or what had they lost or whatever. But the despair is palpable when you're talking about suicides. There are, since late November, 2 tenants who have died, not purposely self-inflicted, but not accepting or advocating for services that they needed to try to stay healthy. We know that they could have benefited from more services, but they just were in despair. Might not have been GIS related, but certainly they were not wealthy people by any means, or even above the poverty line, I would guess. There is this sense of despair, and I feel it myself. What am I going to do when I run out of money? Well, for a lot of us, it may not be purposely jumping out the window, but why would I bother to get treatment? I'm going to die anyway, and things are so grim. I don't have numbers, but I do know of 2 of my neighbors who did not follow through with services they might have had because of just a general feeling of despair. But I can't say that it's GIS related.
And if I can just add to Janet, and I think that's important, we have a senior here who is going through this right now every day. And the other part that I just want to add is I've done a couple of videos of seniors from my region that talk about the despair that they are in because of this particular issue. But I also want to point out that a lot of seniors and their families that are reaching out to my office anyway are terrified. You know, even some of the stories that I told today, seniors are very clear, please don't use my name, because they are afraid that they're going to be punished more. They are so afraid that by saying what is wrong, that the government won't let them have any resources. So, you know, this is a hard one to unpack because there are so many people who are desperately afraid because they are so low income, and also because they're elderly and they may not have access to internet and information like that, so they don't know how to get their voices out there heard. So I can only speak anecdotally from the many emails and phone calls that my offices are receiving. But when you see that kind of energy behind something, you know that there's a bigger story out there for sure.
And just a final addition there to Rachel's point about people feeling really nervous about coming forward. You know, one of the challenges we've experienced with families that are impacted by clawbacks on the Canada Child Benefit is that there's just a lot of folks who don't want to share their story. So we've been fortunate to have a number of brave seniors like Janet who are willing to, you know, it takes courage to put yourself out there and to share your story. We're very grateful to Janet and others who have been willing to do that, because a lot of people are afraid. They're afraid of retribution, sometimes from the government. I had a meeting last week with a woman out of BC who's trying to do some advocacy for her family and other families affected by the child benefit clawback. And the reason they've had a hard time getting their story told is that no one really wants to share their story because they're worried not just about government retribution, but they see the comments that get posted in comment threads on Facebook and Twitter and elsewhere when younger people who depend on the Canada Child Benefit share their story of hardship because of the clawback, and they're worried about their kids getting blowback in school from their peers. They're worried about their neighbors being some of the ones to make those kinds of nasty comments. And so people are trying to, you know, they're trying to protect their financial future, but they're also trying to protect their reputation and their mental health in a really difficult time. And so it does make it hard to get those stories out. And we're seeing that not just in the case of the guaranteed income supplement, but also in the case of other benefits like the Canada Child Benefit.
I'm not seeing any other questions at this time. Are there any final questions? Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. This will conclude our press conference. Thank you.